Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, daily dose of nature. Today's topic, King of the Alps, the Bearded Vulture, presented by NatHab expedition leaders, Annie Van Dinther and Andrea Serena. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Over to you, Andrea.
All right, I'll take that one. Full name Andrea, but my short name's Annie. That's what everyone calls me here. And today, I guess technically speaking, you have two Andreas. Andrea from Italy, my good friend and coworker, and then me, Annie. I'll be helping interview today. So Andrea, I'm so excited to have you here. This is going to be really fun. We tried to do this a few weeks ago, and forces beyond our control made us have to switch to today. So I feel like I've been really excited for this topic for quite a while now, and I'm sure our guests, some of them are feeling the same way. We're going to kind of jump right into who you are. So how about you start telling us about yourself, and we'll pull up the next slide here.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Rob. Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome to this virtual journey dedicated to one of the most incredible birds. And yeah, it's nice to be back. So yeah, that's me in the center during a NatHab trip, and on the other pics some of the friends I made around the world through my working career, those lovely lions and the bear or koalas while working at animal rehabilitation center in South America, mostly against the black market of species, or as animal keeper in Australian wildlife parks, important places, especially regarding conservation programs for endangered species. And then out on the field with my school kids, teaching environmental education. So basically I am a full-time guide and a part-time teacher.
That's fantastic. And so you're coming to us today from Italy. I'm presenting from Alaska, but we're going to talk about some areas that are a little bit different even than those two. So tell us, these are some of the environments that you work in. Tell us about these environments before we get to the bearded vulture.
Yes, I work in a lot of different environments, from the mountains to the coast, but more in general, these are the places where I mostly guide. So basically on Alpine environments, from the Dolomites, where I guide for the national park, to Switzerland, where I'm super happy to guide for NatHab.
All right. And so today we're going to talk about the bearded vulture. I'm used to eagles, and we do have some vultures here in Alaska, but this is an incredible animal. Tell us what the basic stats are on this bird.
Yeah, this is truly a jewel. The bearded vulture has many amazing characteristics, which get more and more interesting with the increase of the age of the bird. First of all, it's the rarest old world vulture, and as adult, this is, together with the cinereous vulture and the Eurasian griffon, the largest European bird, being able to reach, as you see here, a length of 3.8 feet, a weight of 15.5 pounds, and a spectacular 9.5 feet wingspan.
That's incredible. And I just want to be clear, we had a little conversion thing happen where that's a comma there. So you're saying it's 3.8 feet is the length, not 3.28 feet.
3.8 feet, almost 4 feet from the head to the point of the tail.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
And so they can weigh 15.5 pounds. That's heavy.
That it is.
Yeah. And the wingspan is absolutely huge. All right, yeah, so tell us about this. What are we looking at here, Andrea?
Yeah, well, interesting, very interesting to know is that the bearded vultures are the earliest breeders of the European vulture species. The couples are usually monogamous, and they build their nest on rocky walls about 6,000 feet above sea level. In the Alps, usually they start to lay the eggs in late December, and continue up until February, with the parents sharing the brooding responsibilities for a couple of months. And as a chick, they weigh only 150 grams, so probably 5.5 ounces, maybe, and quickly grow dark down feathers. And from there until being sub-adults, their feathers have mostly a dark brown color. Then when they reach 4 years of age, most of their body become increasingly white. We can see on the vulture on the left here in the picture fighting with a juvenile. Yeah, the adults look mostly white only if they don't color themselves, since they used to bath a lot in bodies of water containing iron oxide to help their feather to get orange. The reason behind this very interesting behavior is still a bit of a mystery. Some scientists speculate that it's just decorative, where others claim that the iron oxide, let's say, protects the eggs from infection. But both theories are not confirmed. However, white bearded vultures are kind of common in some mountain ranges, such as the Atlas in Morocco, for example, and possibly because they cannot find iron soil there, but are quite rare in regions like the Alps, where those kind of soils are common. Of course, captive birds are white unless the human keepers provide iron-rich puddles where they can bath.
So here in Alaska, we've got this Sandhill Crane that does this same kind of behavior of sort of painting themselves, and it's really fascinating to me. I think there's lots of questions with the crane too. Is it decorative? Is it something that's attracting a mate, or does it somehow protect against, I don't know, fleas or some kind of insect sort of maybe getting in there? Either way, it's a pretty cool behavior.
It is. Yeah, it is, and it's very, very interesting the fact that the ornithologists are not sure about this behavior yet. But as you said, probably to avoid infection or any kind of pathology, but I think is mostly connected to get nicer, to look better, let's say, and to impress the male or the female.
Fantastic. So here we're looking at two adults, right? And they're both painted. Is this a male and a female?
We can't tell. The female is a little bit bigger usually, but they really look the same.
Okay.
Is something common when we talk about birds of prey in general. The females usually are a bit bigger to protect the nest, right? Because some males sometimes, especially coming from other areas, try to destroy the nest or to kill the newborn to force the females to breed again, right? So, but they very look the same, very much. It's just about few centimeters of difference in length or wingspan, so we can't tell about these two.
Yeah, I used to monitor a bald eagle's nest, and that was the same. I mean, I learned to know who the male and the female were, but it was an incredibly slight difference. to be able to tell that. So tell us about the distribution of the bearded vulture. Where are they exactly in Europe?
Yes. Well, we have to push the button of the time machine first. So let's go back 200 years ago. Bearded vultures were found in all the southern European mountain areas, from Western Spain to the Balkans, right? So then, step by step, less available food like chamois, roe deer, ibex, of course, due to the intensive hunting and poaching, and then a bad reputation resulting from wrong beliefs and wrong legends gave the start to a quick population decrease. In fact, the German name, lammergeyer, or the Spanish one, quebrahuesos, that means bones breaker, reveals it. Like, people thought that the bird was dangerous and an active predator who could even kill not only lambs, but sometimes even small children, right?
Okay, so this is clearly hunting, right? That has happened with the bearded vulture.
Yeah. So yeah, sadly, the bearded vultures were hunted down fanatically, and in the Alpine region, there was even a bounty for each animal killed. And the last living individual in the Alpine area was shot in 1913 in the Aosta Valley in Italy, and is the one you can see here in the picture. But yeah, after this, we're gonna see some historical representation before to see together another map about the vultures distribution.
It is amazing when you see the picture with the three men, you really get a sense of how incredibly large this bird is. Like,
It's huge.
there how big the bird is. So tell us about this. What a phenomenal, I guess this is a sketch, maybe a wood print. Tell us about this image.
Yes, I thought this was very interesting. This comes from the Greek mythology, okay? And here we see Titus, or Titus, I don't know how you call it, Titus probably, which was condemned forever to be eaten again by vultures. Just an example about, what the people believe about, what this animal could do to them.
Yeah. I mean, it almost represents like an evil creature, right? A monster, not just this. Now we think of this incredible bird out in a wild ecosystem, but that image definitely is more violent. And this here too, we're not exactly seeing a peaceful little image here of this vulture.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like in this one, we see two representations that tell us clearly that the vulture were considered a predator, an active predator. In this case, is hunting a chamois on the left and even a viper on the right.
Wow. And so when did we start to see a little bit more of a shift? I mean, we even have some of that violence is here with the vulture and the dog, but I also feel like I'm starting to see more realistic images here.
Yeah, let's say that especially starting from the 19th century, people in general, but mostly, of course, the scientists and ornithologists really started to fall in love with this animal and started to go up there, I mean, on the mountains to study and, to make beautiful sketches like the one you see here. But the situation was dramatic still. These are interesting and beautiful representation, but it's very, very interesting the one you see in the middle where the vulture even attacked an adult person. So all fantasies that generated a huge hate towards the animal and gave the start to the final extinction, of course, here in the Alps.
Wow, it's really interesting to look back historically on these images. I'm used to doing this with bears, right? Because we have all these violent images of bears, and really they're not true representation of how bears behave or interact with humans at all. It's really interesting to see this about a bird, something that I think we don't typically think of being characterized as this sort of, evil monster kind of thing. So this is fascinating. Now, what about where they live in the whole world? Tell us about this.
Yes. So here's an old map, world map, that can make us old world map that can make us understand better the critical bearded vultures European population, at least. So currently, the bearded vultures are the rarest vultures in Europe. They can only be found, for example, in the Pyrenees, let's say around 100 breeding pairs. Then in Corsica Island, which is south of France as well, 8 pairs. Then in Greece, in the Crete Island, 9, 10 breeding pairs. And then all the reintroduced population in the Alps, which now count probably 60 plus breeding pairs. So the total population in Europe, but considering also Russia, which is huge, is estimated to be between 600 and 1,000 couples. But as we can see from the map, what is easy to see is that the vast, wide, and less anthropized Asian mountain and the Asian lands have certainly helped this animal to survive much better there. And here we can also see where, together with NetHab, we might have the chance to see this amazing animal during our nature trips around the world. And that will be for sure in Switzerland, in India, Nepal, and Bhutan, Asia talking, and of course in Africa, especially in Kenya and Tanzania.
And we often as guides have this opportunity to present to each other, like if we have a guide training or something like that. Quite a few years back now, like maybe even more than 5 years back, I was at a training with our guide Paul from Kenya, and he did a presentation on the vulture and how incredibly important the vulture is to the safari landscape, to the areas that we go see, because without them, the whole landscape becomes cluttered really with carnage, right? Anytime something is killed, if there's no vultures there to clean up that mess, then it really does change the ecosystem. And it was a game-changing presentation for me in terms of understanding how critical of a role, when you ask someone to present on Kenya, the vulture isn't necessarily the top of the list of most important animals, because they're not always the most exciting to look at in terms of, it's not a lion or an elephant or something like this. But wow, hearing him speak about it, they're so important. So tell us more about their behavior, Andrea, and what it is that they do to help ecosystems so critically.
Yes. Yeah, unlike the mite, bearded vultures do not hunt live prey. It is, in fact, the only vulture that has specialized in feeding primarily on bones of dead animals. And that's more or less the 85–90% of its diet, which is incredible. And it's also the only vertebrate that does that, right? So it's just unique. The bird is even capable of swallowing and digesting bones the size of a sheep's vertebra. If bones are too big to swallow, the bird gains great heights and drop bones onto rocky surfaces to shatter them into eatable pieces. And that's a practice that takes several years to master for the bird. And this unique eating habit requires many adaptation, and of course makes bearded vultures and vultures in general an essential part of the ecosystem. And so that's why we have to save them, yes or yes.
Andrea, that explains so much about the folklore around them being scary, right? I mean, if you see this huge vulture with a huge bone in its mouth, that's going to lead to some stories about what they're doing. I mean, some of those bones, it sounds like they could look as if they're human, right? So of course they're going to be seen as a treacherous villain rather than a critical ecosystem keeper. So what about their reproduction? Tell us what we're seeing here. What is that like for these birds?
Yes, well, it takes 5 to 7 years for these birds to reach sexual maturity, but breeding success usually starts from age of 8 onward. Pairs in the wild typically lay 1 or 2 eggs, but if both hatch, only the older and stronger chick survives. Nestlings are aggressive and competitive, and as eggs are laid with 5-7 days apart with it, the older chick is stronger and does not allow the weaker one to feed, and so it eventually dies, right? Therefore, a breeding pair or sometimes a trio, because sometimes it's possible to see a trio, can only raise 1 young bird every year. So as we said before, they breed very, very early, which is something hard to imagine considering the extremely cold Alpine temperatures, but this special breeding period is related to the diet of the chicks, not to the adult's diet. Why? The chicks cannot digest bones, so the species has evolved to hatch towards the end of winter when there is potentially a plentiful supply of food. This, of course, includes animals that die from avalanches or animals that die towards the end of the season from not surviving harsh condition, leaving plenty of animal bodies for the parents to feed their chicks.
That makes sense. So we've heard about how they're a villain. We've heard about some of the basics on how they reproduce. And last we left it, they were almost extinct or starting to be reintroduced. So tell us how it is that we have them back in the Alps, especially the Swiss Alps. What's happening?
Yeah, to explain their introduction in the Alps, the past is once again the starting point. By the beginning of the 20th century, they had completely disappeared from the Alpine regions. So efforts to reintroduce the bearded vulture began in the 1970s in the French Alps. Two zoologists attempted to release some vultures that had been captured in Afghanistan, but the approach was unsuccessful. It was too difficult, first of all, to capture them in the wild, and too many died while transported to France. So after that, a second attempt was made in 1986 when conservationists released the first bearded vulture into the Alps, at the Hohe Tauer National Park in Austria, using a technique called hacking, by which young individuals between 90 and 100 days of age from zoological parks will be taken from the nest and placed in a protected area in the Alps. And as they were still unable to fly at that age, the chicks were hand-fed by humans until the birds learned to fly and were able to reach food without the human assistance. And this method was more successful, of course, with over 200 birds released in the Alps between 1986 and 2015. And the bearded vulture population has reestablished itself in the Alps, finally, luckily.
And so this was mostly through the Vulture Conservation Foundation, or was it a different organization?
Yeah, well, today the Vulture Conservation Foundation owns most of the bearded vultures in captivity in the world. And they collaborate with over 40 zoo and breeding centers to coordinate the captive breeding programs of this animal in Europe. Since 1978, together with their partners, they bred more than 600 chicks in captivity, and they released almost 400 birds across several European regions, continuing to do so until the population become self-sustaining and healthy. For sure, also 2021 was a fantastic year for our environments, especially thanks to the release of a total of 24 new young bearded vultures into the wild.
Wow. So they're coming back. The reintroduction is working. And when we go on a natural habitat trip to Switzerland, there is a chance that we will see them. It's difficult to find, I understand, but tell us about this.
Yeah, difficult, but possible. The bearded vulture is actually one of the highlights, for example, of our fantastic Switzerland trip. And in fact, we mostly visit the Swiss Alpine region, and in few places we have chances to spot them, as we did in our first trip there back in 2019, and this year as well. Here we see, for example, the areas where we travel with NetHab in Switzerland and where the bearded vulture can be seen. So, of course, the Swiss National Park, the Bernina Alps, the Pennine Alps, and finally the Bernese Alps.
They're amazing. And you know, when I look at these ecosystems and you talk about how they're parenting on a cliff, I think about the other birds that parent on a cliff. And man, parenting's hard enough to do just with my feet planted on the ground. I can't imagine also doing it on a cliff. So cool, though, to be able to see these birds on one of our trips. Tell us about this distribution map that we're looking at here.
Yes, in this map we see where the released vultures have their territories there in Switzerland, and it's clear that the most important areas are the Swiss National Park and the Bernese Alps. And as we said, we go to hike in both areas, which are just amazing, beautiful places, but of course they are.
Nice. So tell us about this. This is the, I can't even say that word, Park National with, I can't say it. I'm not even going to try. Tell us about these photos. What's happening here?
Yeah, that's funny because that's not, you know, in Switzerland they talk in German, Italian, French, but that's a particular dialect. They talk only in the region where the Swiss National Park is, which is called Romansh. So it's
Okay.
a weird, but yeah, it says Swiss National Park. So between all, for sure, the most iconic and special place the one that gave the start to the Swiss project is the national park that offer an optimal, perfect habitat for the species. So back in 1991, exactly 30 years ago, and after years and years of preparation, the first 3 bearded vultures coming from the breeding station in Vienna and Berlin being released into the wild in the Swiss National Park.
I feel like I'm seeing the basic images of a great wildlife conservation story. I want to see the movie of these guys climbing up into the Alps and carrying these birds. It just looks like such a great story. I'd love to hear it firsthand, you know, from them. So now we're going to get a little bit into our own expedition and adventure. Someday I'm going there with you, Andrea. I just know it. Tell us about the Swiss National Park and the sort of magic that happens there on the natural habitat adventure.
Yeah, we are waiting for you, but for you all. So yeah, the chosen place in the national park to release the first vultures was Val de Stabelhut. Is a very wide and beautiful valley surrounded by very nice mountains, and is a place where we hike with our guests during our trip in Switzerland. And there we have the chance to see few individuals during our trips. As you can see from this one, this is a picture I took 3 years ago, but it's just an example. We've been seeing there a few vultures, probably 3 years ago and 5 or 6 last summer. By 2007, a total of 26 vultures had been released in the park. And in 2007, the first pair bred in Val Tantermozza. And now few pairs regularly raise their young in the park. So for this reason, there will be no further releases of captive bred birds in the Swiss National Park, of course. This is very positive. It's a nice news. That means that the Grisons canton, where the park is, together with the bordering area, which is part of the Stelvio National Park in Italy, is a region that has developed into a real bearded vulture hotspot.
So cool. So cool. So tell us about, what are we seeing here?
Okay. Yeah. Until now, this is about the breeding pairs. So until now, 23 breeding pairs have raised a total of 130 chicks in that region, which correspond to the 42% of the total number of the chicks born in the Alps. Is amazing. Is amazing.
That's so cool. Oh, yeah. I skipped there for you. Okay. What? Ooh, this doesn't look like it's a very happy story. Tell us what happened here.
Yeah. So yeah, these fantastic animals still facing a lot of problem. Of course, we don't believe anymore in 2021 that the bearded vulture is going to kidnap your kids and throw your kids from, you know, mountaintop, but illegal baits, poisoned animal consumption, consumption of remains of lead hunting ammunition, plant-based. Just examples, here in the peak, we see, for example, an adult poisoned in Andalusia, south of Spain, is just an example.
Yeah, so there's several different threats that they face. And what happened here?
Yeah, this is sad. Another death. This, in this case, this was a very young, well, not a very young, but a young vulture that, as you see from the map, was flying a very, very long distance and met his death in Holland, hitting a windmill. So that's another problem, but also, you know, death by electrocution, collisions with power lines, poaching, of course, which is probably one of the greatest plagues of mankind. This wasn't nice to see, but just to show you the plastic that are found on their stomach sometimes. Just sad, but you know, the situation now is much better, and it's just about to keep fighting for them.
So it sounds like they're facing, you know, eating pollution. They're facing, it looks like that was a plane accident, windmills. So there's lots of different things. So conservation still does have to happen, even though there's this great success story of them returning. The story is not over yet. We still have to be tending to and taking care of these birds to make sure they're present in the ecosystem. One way that we help with conservation is through exploration with natural habitat adventures. So tell us about this glacier and what happens on these trips.
Yeah, sure. So regarding last summer's NetApp trip to Switzerland, I wanted to show you this, especially some picture of some beauties we spotted there on the Alps, and more precisely the vultures we were lucky to see on the Bernese Alps. That place is called Glacier 3000. Is a beautiful place our guest love a lot, and precisely at Les Diablerets, we are in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, and Glacier 3000 is our very last Alpine stop during our trips in Switzerland, and that is the place you just saw in the other slide. Beautiful place. And this is the gift we received up there last August while having lunch near the huge rock tower you saw before. And this was just fantastic. This was an amazing adult, a huge adult that literally flew on our heads, just majestic, beautiful. And
Wow.
this was another gift, okay? We were much more than lucky there at Les Diablerets, because during the sighting of the Bearded Vulture, we had the huge luck of being able to observe a very rare passage of a griffon vulture, which you see it here in this picture, basically having the chance to spot in the same place within a couple of minutes two of the biggest European birds and two of the biggest birds of prey of the entire planet.
Right. Wow, so very cool. So that leads us to this sort of bigger picture of the vultures. Tell us about where they fit in here.
Yeah, we see our fella down the bottom on the left. So speaking of sizes and records, I'd like to finish the presentation with this sympathetic slide that remind us that to see the largest, most majestic vultures in the world, we have to fly right to your home in the American continent, where the Californian condor and the Andean condor show us clearly between vultures who the real kings are.
I think this is so interesting because when we see the turkey vulture, which is quite common for us to see, right? You kind of, sometimes when you're looking for a bird of prey here, it could definitely be heard like, oh, it's just a vulture. And that's usually a turkey vulture when that happens, but they look huge. I mean, they still look like really large birds. And I'm used to looking at bald eagles all day. And this size chart here is really helpful for understanding just exactly how large they are. I have not been lucky enough to see the California condor personally, in person, but yeah, this is really cool. I think we need to come up with a NatHab version of this where we can, show the different sizes based on like where you could go in the world. I think that would be really fun to create. So is there anything else about these vultures that we need to know before we move on to what I'm sure are some fantastic questions today? I've certainly learned a ton more about them, and they just seem just quite incredible. Do you have more for us, or should we open it up for questions, Andrea?
Well, maybe just to, if you notice, this is the only vulture that has feathers on his neck. It's only, you can see that only on the bearded vulture and on the Egyptian vulture, which is the cousin. They are very much related. And what's very, very, very interesting is that this bird comes from the oaks, not from cranes. So, and that's also crazy. But anyway, it's very, very nice to see this particular neck. And the reason, of course, maybe I forgot to say it before, is as well connected to the diet. He doesn't need to put his neck, his head inside a dead body to try to find something to eat, because he fed on bones. So this gave him even it's even more beautiful. It's a majestic word, but those feathers, those white feathers, just make him too beautiful. Let's say that.
Extra.
And yeah, it's just beautiful, beautiful, amazing. I hope the guest, some of the guests here tonight with us will join us in Switzerland next year, sorry, because trust me, to see a giant like that flying on your heads is, I can't even find the words, right? I still have goosebumps from last August, so I just wait you up there.
Nice. Nice. That's a great way to transition here. So Rob, when you're ready, we're ready to answer some questions, if there are any today.
Thank you. Yes, there are. And before we start with the question and answer session, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. All right, let's get to some of these questions. So, do you guys know why the vultures started specializing in eating bones?
Well, you know, every species has to evolve considering the habitat, the environments they live. So in the Alpine region, it's not easy to hunt, it's not easy to find food, and there is a huge competition. It's not like the jungle, right? There's no food up there. So probably during their evolution, these birds just understood that there was a lot of food left. And what was the only food left? Bones. And there's a lot of that up there.
And they would probably have competition from other vultures for the carrion, which is like the dead animal and the leftovers there. So even looking at that griffin, it makes me wonder if that bird would have been, you know, more going into the flesh part of the animal. Competition is almost always what drives adaptation. So if there was a bird that was doing a little better with going after your average waste on the Alpine, if you will, then the vulture is going to have to find a specialty in order to survive up there. And that's typically what drives an adaptation.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. So would you consider the vulture a tool user because they use the bones?
That's a good question.
That's a very nice question.
I'll explain why in a minute, but I'm going to let Andrea say it first.
Honestly, I wouldn't, because the tool in that case is not the bone itself, but you know what the bird used to create that situation. So the bones and you know all of that. But yeah, intelligent enough almost to say that the birds could even use tool, because this behavior is just amazing. But I wouldn't say that.
I would say if the bird put the bone on a rocky area, and then took a rock up into the air to land on the bone. Now they're using a tool. So I guess we have to ask ourselves if by virtue of flying up and, you know, letting it smash, is that a tool? We also have that behavior from gulls, from ravens, in areas near the ocean, right? They'll head into the intertidal zone and they'll pick up clams or mussels or some kind of, you know, yummy thing with a hard shell that has food on the inside. And they'll do that same thing. We see it often on our Baja trip. I see it here in Alaska quite a bit. They'll fly up and sure enough, drop that mussel or bivalve onto a hard rock and therefore open it up. They just have to be fast enough at that point to get in to actually be the one to eat it, because often there'll be another bird lurking by just waiting for them to drop it. And so then you see a little fighting over that as well. It is certainly a sign of intelligence and an incredible adaptation, but I'm going to say not a tool in this case.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. That was fantastic. In fact, ravens, together with some species of parrots, are the most intelligent birds in the planet. So fantastic. Thank you.
We need a webinar on ravens and why they're my favorite bird. I think we should do that one next, Andrea.
They are too much. They are beautiful, amazing bird. I don't know why a lot of people don't like ravens. I don't know why. Maybe because they are too intelligent.
Or because they're prolific and they don't have like necessarily bright, beautiful colors. You know, there's a lot of them around and they all look pretty similar. So I think that's a reason that they're just too overly, they're easily overlooked. But certainly if you're an animal behavior, you know, enthusiast as we are, they are a great bird to learn about. But here today we're on the vulture. So are there any more questions about the bearded vulture, Rob?
Absolutely. Let's talk about the bones again one more time. Is it the bearded vulture who is cleaning up the carcass, or do they wait and just go for the bones?
Usually they wait. They look for bones much more than to look for dead animals. You know what I mean? So, for example, they used to follow the wolves packs, for example, to see where they feed, and then they go there a few days later to find already clean bones, and then they pick them up, fly high, drop them, and go for the marrow.
Wow. And, you know, I'm thinking back to 5 years ago, guys. So, you know, don't quote me on this, but I remember when Paul did that presentation, and actually I did reach out to him when we were doing this, because Andrea, I remember you saying to me, it's probably not the bearded vulture that he was talking about. And so we checked in with him because I was like, I don't remember which vulture. I just remember it was a vulture. And I think he said there was a golden vulture as well, and that it was those two that he was specifically speaking about. Again, don't quote me on that name, but I remember him saying there were two vultures that were really responsible. We're talking about Kenya now, for sort of the cleanup, you know, especially after the wildebeest migration is what he was speaking of. But it sounds like we've got another webinar we're planning here as we talk about this. So sounds like I need to get a hold of Paul and have him do the, you know, second chapter of this one.
Yeah, in Africa, I'm very jealous of African guys because they see just unbelievable stuff down there. These two vultures for sure, and they work very well together, are the African griffon and the African bearded vulture. So there is one dealing with, you know, rotten meat and all that stuff, and then the bearded vulture making the very final clean. Just teamwork.
Can you guys talk about how well the vulture can see and hear?
Ooh, I am definitely going to have to leave that one to Andrea. I can speak about birds in general, but not this one.
Okay. Okay. Let's make an example. The bearded vulture can spot a shoe, a pair of shoes, 2 kilometers away. So what's that in miles? Sorry about that. Couple of kilometers. Yes, a pair of shoes, but let's say a rabbit or whatever you want. But I said shoes because he doesn't care about an alive rabbit, right? But just to make you understand what's the view of these animals.
Right. I think that's roughly, it's a little over 1.5 miles if I'm doing my conversion factor correctly. But so incredible eyesight. What about their hearing? Do they have incredible hearing as well?
Not much, not really. They are sensible to the sounds. First of all, they must to be ready in case of huge avalanches. But I will say just middle range is not their
Specialty.
most powerful weapon. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool.
And what is the typical lifespan of a bearded vulture?
Interesting. That's amazing because in captivity, sadly, in captivity, they reach 45 years of age. In the wild, if the animal is healthy, and that means nice environment, good food, no pathologies, and everything goes well, they can reach 30 years of age. So 30 into the wild, 45 in captivity, more or less.
And has the beak strength of the bearded vulture ever been measured? And does it compare to other birds of prey?
That's a great question, because I guess if it's eating bones, it's going to have in some ways a tougher beak, but in other ways it's not doing that. It's got a different job, really, right? So that's an excellent question. What do you think, Andrea?
Yeah, as you said, Annie, the concentration of the powers is on the beak. Is huge, okay, huge wings, but is not very powerful when it flies. It needs thermals, or it can stay even in the nest for days and days. So it's not powerful about in terms of flying or pawns, or but all the power it needs is on the beak. And yeah, as Annie said, that's the place, the alpha place, let's say, big. Then he cannot compete with active predator like golden eagle and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of eagles, how does the size compare to an American bald eagle?
From what I understand, they're quite a bit larger. I haven't looked at the stats on an eagle. There's something I see on a regular basis, but I'm gonna guesstimate here that they're more like a 6-foot wingspan. It looks to me like Andrea is Googling this quickly for us. So, but that would be my guesstimate. I will tell you this from a experiential point of view. Maybe that's just because they're so far up in the air. I'm thinking through this as I speak, but I would think there is some similarity to the turkey vulture. But certainly when I look at those pictures, I think they must be in between the turkey vulture and the bearded vulture. What do you see there, Andrea?
Yeah, sorry about that, but I would love to have bald eagles here in Europe, but we just have those golden eagles, so I'm jealous about you. Anyway, 8.2 feet. That's the bald eagle wingspan, compared to the almost 3 meters of the bearded vulture. Yeah, it's quite bigger.
Wow. Now, introducing the bearded vulture back to the Alps. Now, since they're separated from other populations all over the world, are they becoming a new separate species?
Interesting question. No. All the animals that were bred in the conservations and breeding programs comes mostly from the Pyrenees. So the genetics is typical European, but the problem is that the genetic is getting poorer and poorer now, and they are starting to breed European vultures with other individuals that comes from Asia, for example, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan. But the bloodline is very, very, very similar. So the species is the common, let's say, Eurasian bearded vulture one. Different is the case with the African bearded vultures, that they look the same, but they are not. Sometimes they are a bit bigger. The wingspan is a bit larger sometimes. So yeah, if we're gonna make those kind of breeding, then we could create a new subspecies, but we don't need that, and it's not going to happen.
Great. Thank you for that. But unfortunately, that's the last question that we have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you, Annie, for any closing comments you two might have.
All right. Well, Andrea, I just want to say thank you for presenting with me. This has been so much fun. Glad we finally got to do it. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. It's so cool that we get to continuously talk about conservation and animals and the beak of the bearded vulture, all these things that are incredibly important to us. And it's so cool to see that they're important to so many of you. And Andrea, I'll let you do the closing words.
Thank you very much, Annie, Rob, and thank you especially all the people here tonight with us. For sure, nature lovers. So this is a nice club, and I'm super happy to be here with you. And thank you very much also for your patience tonight. And I hope to see you one day out there.
Annie, Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd like also to thank everyone who tuned in today. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.